You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey, Dr. O,
Brandon Sanders,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is...
Thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Kelly Rimmer on the show with me. She has an amazing new book. It's called The Warsaw Orphan. And I'm going to tell you what, this is such a captivating novel. It will grab you by the heartstrings and not let go until the very end. I love this book so much. We're telling everyone about it, and it is available everywhere now. So go grab your copy today as soon as you finish listening to Kelly and I chat all about it. Welcome to the show, Kelly.
Hi, Hank. It's such a pleasure to be here.
I'm excited to have you. Kelly, we begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
Oh, that's a great question. I have a very, very distinct memory of reading Heidi. I was living in Sydney, in Western Sydney, in a place called Blacktown with my family. And I remember holding that book, laying on my bunk bed, holding that book and being amazed that when I read, I was in the Swiss Alps. And when I put the book down, I was back in Sydney, in Blacktown. And just kind of putting the book up and down and being, what magic is this that can transport me? Whatever this is what I want to do. And it never really varied my whole life. That was really my passion has always been books and writing.
I love it. So from that early experience with Heidi, where did you go from there? How did your reading tastes evolve and grow? And, what did you get into next?
Oh, I loved Roald Dahl probably around the same time. And I read every Roald Dahl book I could find multiple times. And my daughter, who is 9, is actually doing exactly the same thing as we speak.
Love it.
And then from there, I flipped into, I loved girl detective stories. So I was all about Trixie Belden and Nancy Drew for a long time. And some Judy Blume. I actually read lots of the Judy Blume books probably earlier than I should have. I had many questions for my parents as I went along. And then when I was a teenager, I had a teacher who was quite fixated on dystopian novels. And so I had her 2 years in a row, and we read, all of those. We read a whole bunch of those kind of, post-apocalypse kind of stories. And from that, I became a little bit fixated on that genre for a while. And then from there, I read. I started to broaden out a little bit after that. I had an elderly friend my neighbor's grandmother. She would have been in her 80s, and she was, basically a shut-in, and she loved romance novels. And so from there, I read a whole bunch of romance novels because I would go visit her and keep her company. And she just had piles and piles of these tattered paperbacks all around her house. And the whole time I was writing. So my stories just got longer as I got older. It just was my main hobby was either reading or writing.
So Kelly, from an early age, you knew that you wanted to be a storyteller. This was something that you were going to do. But as we age and we come into adulthood, having a family comes our way. This little thing called paying bills usually, comes knocking. And a lot of times the dream that we have early on gets shelved for a while we, get our footing in life and all of that good stuff. What was it that brought you back around to writing and had you try your hand at it? And if I'm not mistaken, I read on your website that it was you were in your 30s when you decided to try again. What was it that got you to do that?
I actually was writing the whole time. I never really stopped, but it
was
it was my secret hobby. In fact, I had a flatmate for a long time, And even I'd write often, I had jobs and I'd be busy during the day and I'd write at night, quite late at night sometimes. And I went to great lengths to keep the secret that I was writing. I was actually embarrassed about it. I remember thinking, oh, imagine if people knew that I thought I had something to say. Isn't that just crazy? But for such a long time, that was how I thought about it. And I was also quite terrified of criticism and negative feedback. I thought this is my deepest, most passionate love is storytelling. And I wasn't sure how I would handle it if people were, people didn't like what I was writing. So I wanted to be published, but I knew it would be difficult. I mean, you hear all the stories about 36 rejections on this book and someone wallpapering their study wall with their rejections. And I did not want to do anything that would challenge my love for storytelling. So for all of that time, I was just writing, and I wrote. I think I probably wrote well over 1 million words before, in terms of full length novels that I would write, edit, discard. I was in my 20s, so I moved around heaps. I'd leave them on a laptop and move out, or I'd get to the end of the process and then delete the story because I didn't really have a plan for putting them out there in the world. But
Oh,
in the back of
wow.
my mind, yeah, I know. I said that to my husband the other day. I wonder if any of those were any good. It's too late now; they're all gone. um, but I had this thought that 35 seemed like a grown-up age, and I had this idea that if I was ever going to try and be published, I would have done it by 35. And then I had kids in my early 30s, and I was working and kids, and it was all busy. But I woke up and it was my 33rd birthday, and I thought, I've never even tried. I've never even shown anyone. And if I really am serious about 35, I need to get a wriggle on because time is disappearing. And so that was the impetus for me to. I briefly self-published a novel and let some of my friends read it, and they were all so supportive and lovely that really gave me the confidence I needed to look for a publisher. And I submitted to a digital publisher in the UK called WWII, and they were very small at the time. There was one publisher and a part-time publicist. Now they're massive, and Hachette has bought them out. But I submitted to them, and they took my first submission was successful. So it was
Wow.
quite a wild journey.
So, several years ago, Malcolm Gladwell published this book, and he popularized the 10,000 hours of practicing your craft until you become an expert at it. And you, it sounds like you absolutely did that. You put in your
Yes.
time and then some. Did you ever have the presence of mind while you were doing that to tell yourself, this is my apprenticeship. This is me honing my craft, sharpening the tools that are going to go in my writer toolbox. And one day I'm going to be fully prepared, because of this time that I'm putting in now. Or was it just your hobby, just the thing that you did to unwind and to let your mind relax and or whatever it was, to you at the time. But did you ever see yourself as putting in the work that would be necessary to realize your dream?
That is a fantastic question, but I didn't. I really didn't. I just love to tell stories, and I dreamed that people would read them. That seems like such a fanciful thing. I really didn't. I wanted to be published, but I didn't expect that I would be published. I was hopeful, but I wasn't confident about it. And so, and I often say, I think to be successful in publishing, you need to be the kind of person who wants to write so much that even if it's a no one day, even if the highs and lows end up with there's no path forward in the industry, are you still going to be telling stories? Because if that's the passion you have, then I think those people, somewhat ironically, tend to do really well. Because if storytelling is just what you do, if it's how you're right, if it is an escape, and if it is a relaxation, and if it's fun, then that those people, you can feel the passion in the way that they write, and
Sure.
that resonates with people. So I think I would still be writing even if I didn't have, even if it wasn't going out into the world in the form of a book. I would still be writing because it is my favorite, other than I've got a family now and pets and hobbies,
Oh yeah.
but still, given on a great day, I tell a story. And that's always been the case. So I didn't really think of it as those 10,000 hours, but in hindsight, I did everything wrong in terms of like how I did that first submission, and I hadn't done enough research. And the fact that they picked it up was a miracle. But also that million words that I had written certainly had an impact on the quality probably of the manuscript I submitted.
Sure. And was it a miracle that they picked it up, and ran with it, or was that just what would happen if you would have submitted to anyone? I mean, who knows at this point? That's a fun little exercise to think about.
It is. Yeah, that's true. I had actually written that novel 10 years earlier. I had written the first. That was one of the ones that I kept. It felt special when I wrote it, and I kept it in my Hotmail inbox. And so I had written it such a long time before, and I'd spent, so over the years, I'd, come back to it and do a bit of editing or revising or this idea or that idea. So I don't know. I wonder what would have happened, but there's no way to know.
Looking for a tool to help you visualize your story before the drafting begins? Plot Pens is cloud-based and optimized for any device. There's nothing to download. From the new writer who isn't sure how to tell their story to the veteran who can increase their productivity dramatically, we've had experienced writers lay out a detailed structure for several novels in a series in a matter of a few days. The app takes you through 4 steps of the process: the concept or log line. Make sure you have a solid concept that you can keep coming back to throughout the process. The outline, 12 beats and 3 acts, each has a description of what should be happening with examples. The board, 40 cards. We take the 12 beats and add sub-beats to those, breaking it down even further and being very specific about what should go into each. These also have examples and descriptions. Right. We take those 40 cards and turn them into a to-do list. For a 50,000 word book, it's about 2 cards per chapter roughly. We have a beautiful editor built into the app. You can export your manuscript to a PDF anytime with the click of a button. Let Plot Pens help you visualize your writing project. Use code HANK10 to get 10% off Plot Pens. plotpens.com.
Authors, I have a fantastic new service to tell you about. It's called PubSite. PubSite is a service to help you build your very own website, your home on the web, where you can promote your work and give your fans a place to connect with you. PubSite is a website platform that allows every author, regardless of budget, to have a great-looking professional website developed by the book marketing professionals at FSB Associates. PubSite is the new easy-to-use DIY website builder developed specifically for books and authors. Whether you're an author of 1 book or 20, or a small publisher, PubSite allows you to build, design, and most importantly, update your website pain-free. No need to be dependent on a designer or webmaster to make a small but costly change to your website. Save the money and do it yourself. PubSite is the best platform for authors because it's a book-centric platform. PubSite was built just for authors and small publishers. Every design, feature, and layout is book-centric. They have customized designs for you to use. It's easy to build. No coding or HTML is necessary to create a stunning, professional-looking website with all the features you want. Get a custom domain name, yourname.com. It's simple to update. You can add all of your books, add a blog and a book tour, sell from any retailer, manage your email list and social media, and even do e-commerce. Build your website with a 14-day free trial, then pay just $19.99 per month, which includes hosting. And we offer packages starting at $499 to set up the website for you. Pub-site.com, the place to help authors find their home on the web.
Well, I would like to tack one thing on to the previous question, and that would be on your website. You've got a note from Kelly, which is fantastic. But the last bit of that, you said, "I wish I could go back in time to tell that kindergarten version of myself that one day all of her storytelling dreams would come true." if you could go back and tell, yourself that, hey, I promise it's going to work out. Would you have believed that? Or it's that, and that, again, it's one of those questions that you can't honestly answer. But would it have made a difference to tell your younger self that it's all going to be okay, it's going to work out?
I think, there were tough times in those years, and I think it would have been every now and again. I wake up and I just kind of pinch myself that I get to do this for a job. That I had a book come out and it was on a New York Times list last week. Like, this is so surreal to me that these stories have resonated the way they have, and I think I think if there'd been a way to go back and tell that kid that these amazing things were going to happen. First of all, I don't think she would have believed it, but I think it was the hope that some of this would happen that got me through some really tough times. So I really do wish I could go back and just give myself a big hug and say, look, keep telling those stories. It's all going to be great.
Oh, don't we all wish that? Don't we all
Yeah.
wish that?
Yeah.
What was that first book that was published? Because you said this was a story that you had been hanging on to for 10 years, and you obviously had written other things after that. And let me qualify that question with, I find it really interesting that people that have 20, 30 books in their back catalog, and maybe are on a book a year schedule, feel very differently about their book than new writers. When you write that first novel, you almost feel like this is the most precious thing in the world, and I'm so dearly connected to this work. It would be very difficult to move on past this book because you're so connected to it and so invested in it. What was it about that book that felt so special to you that you kept going back to?
I think that's a really good question. Again, you've asked very good interview questions, Hank.
Thank you.
I think it was because I actually had the idea for the first scene in that book, which takes place at a ferry wharf on Sydney Harbour. And I was working in Sydney, and I'd had a really tough day I was working in IT, and quite a pressured job. And I was sitting at the ferry wharf, and I saw this interaction take place in front of me, this really unique interaction, and it just sparked. It was probably my first experience of really having a story just appear out of nowhere, just this one little trigger, and my imagination's off on this wild journey. And I didn't actually know what genre I wanted to write at that point. I was writing speculative fiction, and I was writing little bits and pieces of other things. Probably the only genre I was definitely not going to write was crime, because I'm a bit of a chicken and I get spooked pretty easily. So I was really kind of still experimenting with my voice as well. But that story, that scene just was so vivid to me that I kept coming back to it over the years, and that story took on a really different tone over time as well. I read Jodi Picoult's My Sister's Keeper when I was, or probably a year or two after that, and I loved the way that she took this incredibly complicated moral dilemma and wrote about it in this light conversational tone. And I thought to myself, that's what I need to do. That's what I want to do. That narrowed my kind of path in terms of how I wanted to write. And so I came back to that scene on the ferry wharf again, and then changed the way that I was writing to try and make it more morally complex and all that kind of stuff. So I think it wasn't the first novel I'd written, no. And I don't know if there was just something about it that felt special. I do think that when you're aspiring to be published, you have to be willing to throw away your first novel and maybe your second, because sometimes you need a few goes at it to find the groove and to find the voice. And that's absolutely heartbreaking to people, but it's just the way it is.
Right. And I think that's a very hard lesson for a lot of new writers to learn.
So tricky.
Because you're so invested. This is you pouring out your soul, and Yeah, but anyway, you went on to publish several romance novels and what we might refer to as women's fiction.
Yes.
And the last few books that you have published have been historical fiction,
Yes.
especially based around this World War II time frame. What was it that initially drew you to this genre and these types of stories?
Well, it was actually my mother's family history that first sparked my interest in particularly World War II Poland, because they were Polish Catholics. They were displaced by the war and came to Australia. Obviously, from my accent, people probably have already figured that out. um, and I had written an earlier historical novel. My second novel was set in Australia in the 70s. Around there was a forced adoption policy in many government institutions, and so that novel is about the implications of that. But I didn't think of myself as a historical novelist. I just was thinking about, even before I was published, actually. So it would be 12 years ago now. I was at my family's Christmas function, which is summer here at Christmas time, and we hold this party every year. It's kind of our nod to our Polish heritage. We all get together and we eat Polish food, and my aunt often will have a distant relative post us communion wafers from Poland. And we just have a Christmas party. And I was at that Christmas party one year, and I looked around and thought, oh my goodness, there's a lot of us. There was more than 50 direct descendants from my grandparents. So from this Polish Catholic couple, more than 50 people. And I thought, we're so diverse. So we have so little in common, other than the fact that we're all Australian. And I wondered how that happened. How on earth did we end up here? We could have just as easily wound up anywhere after, my grandparents could have wound up anywhere after the war. And because they landed in Australia and kind of pressed on with their futures and didn't like to look back, and certainly didn't like to talk about what they'd been through, we just didn't know. We didn't know how we ended up here. So over the years, I started reading World War II kind of, reference books and texts, trying to get an idea of what life might have been like for them there in rural Poland. And out of that research emerged these characters who just would not let me go. And so for probably 10 years, that story was simmering away in my mind. And I'd go to pitch it to my editor, and then at the last minute I'd think, oh, it's too hard. I don't know that I can do the story justice. And I was very nervous about writing about World War II, because it is an immense responsibility to represent it accurately. And then one day it just felt like time. I knew I could go to Poland, and I knew I was at a point in my career where I could justify a trip to Poland, and where people would, be able to access the research that I needed to. And so that was the story. And it was quite a remarkable, researching that book was a remarkable experience, because I learned so much about my grandparents' lives. While I was in Poland, I did some direct research into them, and found a cousin and met with a cousin. And she actually took me to my grandmother's childhood home, which eerily was exactly what I was picturing for the family home in my novel. And she might have described it to me when I was a child. I don't know, but just somehow I'm picturing exactly the right house in exactly the right spot, and it just was incredible. So yeah, that's how that came to be.
So Kelly, when you're tackling a book like The Warsaw Orphan, as opposed to the other types of fiction that you love to write, what is the creative process like? And let me ask specifically. I love to hear about how stories are born, like that first moment where a story comes into being, and in the beginning, like before you begin the work on a novel, it doesn't exist in any form whatsoever. But then as writers do, you start playing the what if game. It may be a novel that you read, a movie you saw, a song that you heard, a news article you read, begins to kick your imagination off, and you start playing what if games, and then you set the stage in your mind with characters that come out of nowhere, and then all of a sudden they inhabit the story, and and then in some form or fashion the story exists, and then you as the writer then begin to excavate that and bring the story out of that. Is the Obviously the process is different if you're writing an historical fiction novel versus a romance novel or some family life drama. But how different is the process other than the gathering historical facts that you might need to build plot points around and turning points in the story and that sort of thing? But is the creative process that different other than the research aspects?
Yeah, it is in the sense that the research directs where the story goes in a way that's a little unique. So I'm writing fiction in a world where, against the backdrop of historic events, and I try to get that as accurate as I can. So if I plot, I'm someone who will have a quite an extensive outline and I write from that. But if I find, in fact, it's happened on the novel that I'm writing now, if I start doing the research and realize that, I start with such a scant understanding of the era that I'm writing in. And so if I find that what I thought, as I start to do the deep research, if I find that what I thought was the case wasn't, then I change the story so that it is going to be as accurate as I can get it. Of course, there's times when you can't do that and you have to make little niggles of every now and again. I've had to move something in the story because the true historic timeline hasn't quite worked out. But for the most part, I try and stick to it. And so that can change the plot significantly. But other than that, I mean, the case of the Warsaw Orphan, I actually probably plotted out a big chunk of this for The Things We Cannot Say, my earlier historical World War II novel. And I had to, the main character in the Warsaw Orphan, Amelia, she has a minor role in The Things We Cannot Say, but I originally wanted her to have a larger role and to go ahead and do some of the things that she does in the Warsaw Orphan. But I had to it was too big. The story was already so immense that I just couldn't fit it in. And so I kind of chopped that subplot out and then forgot about it for years. And, 2 whole years, I didn't give it another thought. And then I was at a book club and someone was talking about her grandmother was smuggled out of a ghetto in Hungary in a suitcase. And
Wow.
yeah, and that just sparked this memory of this subplot I had, because Amelia, my main character in the Warsaw Orphan, gets involved in a scheme to rescue children from the Warsaw Ghetto. And that wasn't the muse kind of, was going, okay, let's go. And I'm at the book club trying to focus on the questions, and I'm thinking, oh, I could dig back into that world. And people keep asking me to write a sequel, and I can't because this story was self-contained. And then at the end of that book club, that same woman, she gave me this quite intense stare, and she said, "Could you write a sequel?" And I said, "No, I can't because it's all self-contained." And she said, "Well, can't you just write Amelia's story?" And I could, because that was the subplot. So I actually looked up the dates. I did a library talk here in my hometown a few weeks ago. So I got the photos of the book club out so I could show people on the screen. And I looked up the dates. And this is how quick the process was. That book club was the 1st of June, and I submitted my proposal on the 18th of June. So in that 2 and a bit weeks, all I did was frantically research and frantically plan this outline. And what is in the book is basically, there's a few little things that I had to tweak or move because of the research, but the book is basically that outline.
Wow. Kelly, there's been an interesting thing that's happened in the world of publishing over the last several years, that this time period is fertile ground right now for all sorts of historical novels, that people are uncovering all sorts of little nooks and crannies of this worldwide event and this time period, and telling stories about it. Why do you think, as a novelist who's working in this time period, why do you think that our interest is so piqued right now about specifically the time around World War II and the way that this massive event affected people on a personal level? Why do you think it is that we, as the reading public, are so hungry and almost have an insatiable desire for these stories right now?
Yeah, I think there's two things. I think we are coming to a period where the people who lived these stories are, reaching the end of their lives. And I think
Right.
we as a society become aware that we are losing something in losing them. That if we don't hear the stories of what happened, of course, history is not static. Like, it's happened, but it can happen again. And World War II was such a catastrophic disaster that we as a species so desperately need to keep learning the lessons from it. And so I think that's one factor. And I think the other factor is the world is a pretty chaotic place at the moment. And we I think we go searching for an escape to a different world when things, as readers, when things are really rough. And World War II is an interesting era to escape into because it's not particularly pleasant. It's not like a light-hearted romance or a crime novel where you know exactly what's going to happen. Kind of the genre has rigid kind of conventions. It's not like that, but it gives us a perspective, and I think it brings us a gratitude that, as rough as things are and as tough as things are, we still are in a better place than we might have been, and we can learn the lessons and we can do better. So I think it's a combination of all of those things.
What would you say, Kelly, to someone who's not familiar with your work and who's thinking about picking up the Warsaw Orphan? And what would you tell them about this book? What's your elevator pitch for this book?
Oh, okay. It is the story of two teenagers. Amelia is living in Warsaw. She lives quite an insular life. She's living with her adoptive parents in an apartment block, just a few blocks from the Warsaw ghetto. They're nervous for her because she has she's potentially in danger because of the actions of some of her family. And so she lives under an assumed name. She's living as Elzbieta. And being nearly 14, she's just a little rebellious. She is frustrated that her life has become so small, and she rebels in really subtle ways. And through that rebellion, she meets a neighbor, Sara, who is involved in a scheme to rescue children from the Warsaw ghetto. And Amelia, being quite a headstrong young woman, she finds a way to be involved in that herself. And through that work, she meets Roman Gorka. And Roman and his family are trapped in the ghetto. He has a little baby sister. She's 6 weeks old, and the conditions in the ghetto are such that his sister is really not doing very well. And that meeting between Roman and Amelia changes both of their lives. And we follow them through the years of the ghetto and the ghetto uprising, and then later on the Warsaw uprising, and in the early years of the communist occupation.
This is a story that I'm recommending to everyone. My wife and I both read it, and we loved the book so much.
Thank you.
Absolutely. The Warsaw Orphan is available everywhere now. When you're hearing this, you can grab it in Kindle edition. There's a link in the show notes of this episode. Also in hardcover. This is a great book to have on your shelf and to loan out to other family members and friends that need to read it. Also in an audiobook. Have you had a chance to listen to the finished audiobook yet?
I did. It seems a little narcissistic to listen to my own audiobooks, but I always do it. And
you should.
Yeah, and it's a different experience. And I always think that the narrators or the voice actors have nailed it when the person who has read this thing probably 50 times, when I am at the edge of my seat, and because they bring it to life in such a vivid way, I almost, at times, I find myself going, oh, what's going to happen next? I mean, I know what happens next, but
Right.
the audio of this book is extraordinary. These narrators just were incredible. So, yes, I have listened to it, and I do think it's a fantastic format. I mean, I love audiobooks in general, but I think these voice actors just did a great job.
Well, if you would like to listen to the audiobook as well, there's a link in the show notes of this episode. Just click over, pick it up on Audible and listen to it throughout your day. We're going to put links to all the places you can get it in the show notes of this episode. Kelly, if people are just discovering you and want to get into all of the amazing stuff that you're involved in and doing, where can they find you online?
They can find my website at kellyrimmer.com, and there's links to all of the social networks and all of that kind of thing through there. So that's kellyrimmer.com.
Excellent. We'll link that up as well. Kelly, this has been so much fun chatting. We're going to send everyone to pick up a copy of The Warsaw Orphan, a World War II novel. Thank you so much for taking time to come on the show.
Oh, it's been a pleasure to chat with you, Hank. Thanks so much.
Authors, if you're looking for a partner to help ensure that your book is the best it can possibly be, look no further than Pico's House. Crystal and her staff make a conscious effort to be critical yet courteous. They also strive to make the business side of things run smoothly so that you can rest easy knowing that your manuscript is in capable hands. Whether you need beta reading, developmental editing, a manuscript critique, line editing, copy editing, or proofreading, Pico's House is the one-stop shop for you. Check them out today at picoshouse.com to get started.